Hello, good morning, Sitaram, and welcome to another program in the series Addiction and Recovery. I'm your host, Ram Naresh Dwarika, as usual, welcoming all our brothers and sisters in Trinidad and Tobago, of the Caribbean, worldwide, and wherever you might be listening to this program on whatever social media platform. As indeed, the program is posted on Facebook and YouTube at the completion of the program every morning. And the reason is that, alcoholism, drug addiction, addiction generally is a disease, but it's a disease of denial. That most people who suffer with this condition, they have a tendency to be in denial and do the greatest challenge when working with an or trying to help an alcoholic or a drug addict is to get them to admit and accept that they have a problem. And the reports are that, a lot of people are using this program, the link, to send to friends who they think may benefit from the program, or families who has a member of their family who might be suffering from some form of addiction, whether it be an addiction to a substance, or whether it be a behavioral addiction like gambling or one of those. And they are finding a great use for it. As indeed, if you go to my YouTube channel, you type in the name Ramnaresh Dwarika, Addiction and Recovery. All the programs are there in Facebook and YouTube. And I have dealt with so many different topics on the whole question of addiction and recovery. They're all there, and you can select from them what you believe might be beneficial and so on. So let me remind you again, this program is also going to be repeated on radio and TV Jagriti tonight at 10 p.m. And today I am going to be dealing with quite a number of questions that have come in to me between the last week and this week program. Every week I've been talking about the realities of addiction and the hope of recovery. And today I thought we could deal with some, questions, very popular questions. Some of them have been sent in by various people who follow the program, and some of them I have been asked over the years, and I thought I'd deal with them this morning because addiction doesn't just affect individuals. It touches families, workplaces, and communities. And today, we're tackling your most common questions about addiction, treatment, and the hope for recovery. So let's dive right into it. Understanding addiction. That's the most important thing. And this is what this program is about. It's about helping our listeners, our brothers and sisters there, understand the nature of addiction, what it is, because there's a lot of misconceptions. I have dealt with some of those in the past, but just to review it, what exactly is an addiction? Is it a choice or a disease? Now, there's still a lot of people in the world today who still believe it's a question of choice. You know, yes, I myself have been saying to a lot of people who you are, where you are, how you are, and all of that is based on the choices you have made in the past. And yes, I will agree it is a question of choice, but it may have you reach to a point where now your choice is influenced by the fact that you have become dependent on it. So now, even though you have insight, and that's the critical thing here, you have insight that it is causing you harm, it is causing you problems, and yet you can't seem to prevent yourself from using the drug or engaging in the behavior. And that is the difference between whether you have a choice in the matter. And this is why there's so much, you know, resistance, even from the person who is addicted. They still would like to exercise that choice. And there was a time in the past when they were able to and now finding that they can't. And other people are egging them on and reminding them that, look, you can choose to do it or not to do it, which is true. But when you have become addicted, and what the science is saying that is addiction is a chronic brain disease that changes how the brain processes reward and self-control. And while the first use of drugs or alcohol might be voluntary, that is by choice, addiction takes away the sense of choice, where whether you like it or not, you seem to be heading to the bar, reaching out for the drink or the drug. Now, with treatment and support, recovery is absolutely possible. But it is important to understand, and for the people around the alcoholic or drug addict, and communities, societies, employers, all of them, they need to understand that this is no longer when a person has moved from social drinking or social usage or usage to compulsive use, then they need help. They don't have a choice, really. They may appear to have a choice. Yes, they have. Their choice would be either to tough it out and you know right into the gates of hell and insanity, or to choose to accept help. That's the choice now, whether you want to accept help or not. Now, another very important question is, how do you tell when a person is addicted? Employers, I mean, even doctors have had difficulty with this. I've heard the joke that, this doctor said, but you don't drink as much as me, so you're not addicted. Well, again, it is not dependent on how much you drink or how often you drink that determines whether you've become addicted. It is what happens when you take that first drink. Because there's a lot of people who could stay sober for weeks and weeks and months and so on, even years. But if they take that first drink, it develops a chain reaction inside of them. That the body seems to call for more and more. And that's the hallmark distinction between a social drinker and an alcoholic. A social drinker can take one, two, or three drink and put it down there, even have drink in the glass and leave it, and go about their business. The alcoholic may not drink for weeks or months or years, as I said, but when he takes that first drink, he can't predict what will happen after that. Most of the time, he will go on to take another one. And, there's a saying, the best drink for an alcoholic is always the next drink. So that, again, it is not how much or how often, is what happens when you take that first one. So that, what are some of the things people, relatives and siblings can look for in the person that tells you that there may be a sign of addiction? And that is, first you look for the changes in their behavior. Usually you have people who use drugs. Of course, when they are inebriated, when they're drunk, you can easily tell. They're swinging and swaying and very outgoing and noisy and boisterous and sometimes aggressive and all of that. You can tell a person is drunk or high. But the baffling thing is that even when they're not under the influence, they can be subject to mood swings. They can become very irritable or very anxious. And that is because now that the alcohol or the drug is wearing away, they are in withdrawal. And sometimes withdrawal could even be worse than the actual influence of the drug. So you look for things like secrecy, where they're now isolating, they don't come out for the room unless they just come out to get something to eat and go back. And I was talking about digital addiction, where I am seeing a lot of young people now who are becoming addicted to the cell phone and the tablet and the laptop. where they are spending more and more time uh, playing games on social media, on various platforms, and can't seem to get out of it. And of course, it leads to a neglect of responsibilities, whether in the workplace, whether in the house, whether in the family. So these are some of the early signs of addiction. Then there are physical signs, weight loss or weight gain. Either of those, lack of sleep, insomnia is one of the critical, especially in alcohol addiction, because alcohol being a sedative, so a lot of people start using it at first to help them to cope during the day, but they find later in the night they can't sleep and they start becoming dependent on taking a drink, the popular nightcap that turns into a monster where you have to take more one, you have to take two, you have to take, as you develop tolerance, you have to drink more, you have to take more often, you become dependent. Without it, you can't sleep. And in previous programs, I have cited the fact that a lot of people would have gone to the doctors, the psychiatrists, with the condition of insomnia, which is when you're having difficulty to sleep, and they were prescribed sedatives. But then they find that, you know, with time they develop tolerance to the 5 milligram of whatever sedative, and they have a bar in the house or they have the drink, and they're supplementing it with alcohol. And I've said this pretty often in the past, I'll repeat it again. Now, the people who developed the tablet, the sedative, did not do their testing with people who were under the influence of alcohol. They would have done it with normal folks. And so they will graduate it, but and prescribe it in a form that would be safe. That if you take 5 milligrams, okay, you're safe, or 10 milligrams. But a person taking alcohol is also a sedative. So it's like you're double dosing yourself. And yes, it can become fatal because instead of putting your brain to sleep, you may put your heart to sleep. And if your heart drop asleep, you're dead. So there have been casualties in the past, fatalities, I would say, from people overdosing because they were, in addition to using their prescription pills, they're now using alcohol. And that has further implications, if I may say, because a lot of people I see, over the time, they go to Alcoholics Anonymous and they want to stop drinking the alcohol, but they're still taking the prescription pills. The body is unable to discriminate between what you bought in the rum shop and what you bought in the pharmacy. The body just responds to the effect of the drug. So whether it be in pill form, whether it be in liquid form as alcohol or what, you know, the body is a sedative. A sedative is a sedative. The body reacts to it the same way. And this is why you can become dependent on both. And as a result, your sobriety, abstinence is precarious if you're still using psychotropic drugs because you're not taking the illicit drugs, the marijuana or the cocaine or the alcohol, which is legal, but you're still taking the prescription pills that does the same thing. Those innocent looking little pills, they're very, very powerful and effective. And again, it is backed up by the fact that, look, this was prescribed by the doctor, and I'm not blaming the doctors here. As much to say, though, that any doctor, physician who is prescribing psychotropic drugs need to work out, especially for drug addiction, short-term use. And I will speak about that in a little while. Yes, there's a place for the use of drugs in recovery because some people have gone to such a chronic stage that if they don't have it, they start hallucinating and going to what is called delirium tremens, where They feel people are coming to kill them and they jump out of windows and all kinds of things. And they can hurt or harm themselves or others. So in cases like that, especially where a person has been having hallucinations and all of that, they should not be detoxed without supervision. They should be detoxed in a medical setting under medical supervision and very often with the use of psychotropic drugs, anti-anxiolytics and sedatives and so on. So there is a place. However, any doctor who prescribing these drugs, and usually the ethics of the profession, as far as I understand it, is that only psychiatrists really supposed to prescribe psychotropic drugs because that's their forte. But it has come. I know, I am aware that even general practitioners are prescribing these drugs, to patients, and then worse off, the patients themselves, they read the label, they go to the pharmacy, and they buy it under the counter, or there are some pharmacies that, I mean, they operate as though they are just grocery or rum shops themselves. Even prescription drugs, that's supposed to come be prescribed, given with some of these people, and I'm not going to call names, but they are selling it under the counter. And then there's so many other ways that people who have become addicted find ways to beat the system. They get relatives who work in the hospital setting, or others who have a legitimate sleep problem and who can get access to the medication to slip them some. But that's another subject. Coming back to some of the signs of drug addiction is a lot of times you see weight change. People who use marijuana tend to start losing weight. People who use the amphetamines, the cocaine and so on, they start losing weight. The people who use alcohol, on the other hand, may start putting on weight, getting that punch, you know. Then, of course, there's the lack of sleep, the insomnia, where, as I spoke, where a lot of people are now forced to, because, sleep is said to be golden. And if you haven't slept for a day or two, you would know what I'm talking about. You need to get the sleep, otherwise, you're in a mess. You can't work. So then, eventually, with prolonged use, you can see the person's deportment, poor hygiene, not bathing, not shaving, keeping their hair on kempt. A person who used to be neat and tidy, you start seeing them, and of course they'll have excuses for all of those. And if it's your sibling, if it's your son or daughter, you need to trust your instincts, because you have known this person almost all your life or all their life, and you can tell. Now, I should warn you, should not jump to conclusions just because of what some of these signs or symptoms. But these are red flags that should cause you to want to investigate further, to ask questions. And the other question I got is, how can parents prevent teens from using drugs or alcohol? Well, one is you need to have open and honest conversation with your children. I have done that myself and I recommend it to other people. You're looking at a show and you see there's drinking, there's the consequences of drinking, somebody had an accident. Those are all cues that you can pause the TV and ask the children, what do you think about that? And use it as a teaching tool, an actual example, you see, and break it down for them. You see and trace it back to where the problem was with the drinking. So that open, honest conversations with them makes a big difference. However, most important to my mind is our parents being, and siblings and community members being role models. We can't ask our children or suggest to them that they should not drink, when in actual fact what they're seeing is that whenever relatives come, the first thing comes out is the drink, or we offer them a drink. Christmas, we are celebrating with drink. Easter, even Diwali, even all the festivals and the social gatherings are punctuated with we go by the river or the beach and the drink comes out. You understand? So that, in this culture here, we really don't need an excuse. There's so many socially accepted ways that it is okay to drink. You know, it has become almost part of our lifestyle. So that parents and siblings who want to effect change in their families, you need to be able to, if you're not alcoholic, then you shouldn't have a problem with staying away from the drink. And if you drink, you need to behave in a responsible manner. You yourself, you can't be addicted and then telling somebody else. In fact, I don't know anyone who is a drug addict who is trying to tell another person to stop. In fact, they will encourage you to drink so that children imitate what they see. I used to work at Cora Hospital, and on the corridor going to the clinic, somebody posted up a big sign on the wall, the world's greatest copier. And my mind went to either Xerox or Canon or one of those, companies that produce these photocopying machines. But under the banner of the world's greatest copier was a little 3-year-old, 4-year-old girl who had her mother's shoes, high heel shoes on, her mother's necklace, rouge and lipstick and all of that. And, I felt that that was a very powerful message. Because in truth and in fact, I remember even as a child, I couldn't wait to get into my father's shoes and wear his stuff and use his whatever tools and all of that. And of course, I'd get into trouble sometime for that. But there's that yearning in children to become like their parents, and of course, to enjoy the privileges of being an adult. And parents need to be aware of that. The children are looking at us all the time. They are modeling from us how they and even as adults, very often it has crossed my own mind when I had to discipline my children. And I'm sure you listening would have probably had this experience as well. You know, First thing comes to my mind what my parents would have done in a situation like this. And sometimes I would actually verbalize it and tell my children and say, hey, you are lucky you don't have to deal with my father, you know, or my parents. But if my father or grandfather was an alcoholic, I would probably not want, I wouldn't have the moral authority to really correct them on that. So there goes. Again, what we should do though is encourage our young people, encourage our children to pick up healthy habits. And I was saying to someone not just yesterday that one of the greatest gifts we could give our children is a healthy lifestyle, healthy eating habits. Because when we are not around, that is what will sustain them. We need to introduce them to a higher power, God. And you know, this talk with them about our own relationship with our higher power. Like I tell my children, whenever I'm faced with difficult decisions, I was not sure what I'd do, I'd pray about it. And yeah, sometimes I didn't like the answers I got, or I didn't like the results I see. But then later on, I found out, thank God it happened that way, because I have come now to develop a faith that has taken me away from believing to knowing that I can trust. And I hope that my children and all of you listening out there, before you demit this world, would have developed a relationship with the God of your understanding where you move from believing to knowing, where you know you can trust your higher power. You know that God will take care of you. You know that God who has brought you this far is not going to abandon you now. And I don't want to sound like I'm preaching on the program, but this has been my personal experience. As I say, the best thing we could do for our children, remember, we are not always going to be there. but our influence, our teachings will always be there with our children. Maybe they will not listen to us now. They'll rebel when we say this, but they will remember. When they get themselves in trouble later on, they'll remember, daddy was saying this, mommy was saying this. So again, we need to encourage them to pick up, you know, get involved in sports. Sports is a good way to have young people burn up that extra energy that would get them into trouble later on. Let them pick up hobbies, things that they can do and keep themselves occupied. You remember in our early days, we learned that the idle brain is the devil's workshop. So give them things to do, get them involved in things. Now, as I say sports, I want to add a proviso though, because I know a lot of these people who push the weed and so on, sell weed, they go and hang out in the grandstand, in the pavilion where these boys are playing football or cricket and all of that, and they are always willing to sell it to them. At first, give it to them, get them hooked, and all of that. And I'm saying that so that the law enforcement should need to visit these places sometimes during events and check out and see if, what is happening. So, yes, encourage them to play sports, but also be mindful of these because the cigarette companies and all, they target these sporting arenas to advertise and promote their products. Another good thing is volunteering. I am involved with the NCIC, the National Council for Indian Culture. I'm a director there, and we encourage young people to volunteer to come and assist during the Diwali Nagar, during other festivities and occasions and so on. We have young people who volunteer to serve, to usher, to manage, to guide the other young people, and they get certification for that they are now able to use for entry qualifications to the University of the West Indies. The University of the West Indies accept these entry qualifications. So it's not only keeping the children, young people occupied. In our organization, there's also a youth arm. So too in other organizations, you have youth arm. You get your children involved in them. There's in communities, there's the Ram Leela celebrations now. These are good avenues that could develop the drama and performance skills and singing and dance and all of that of children. I have my own grandchildren who are involved in various kind of, you know, creative extracurricular activities, swimming, volleyball. One of them is in archery as well, and they're doing very well. And these are things that build their self-esteem. They feel good about themselves. So they don't have to use drugs to feel good or to depend on, you know, or be taken down by negative thoughts of other people and other friends. They become much more self-aware and confident in themselves. And what is learned in sport, a lot of things are learned in sport. A lot of people don't realize just it's not just playing and enjoying yourself. You in sports you learn to negotiate relationships. You learn how to deal with losses without having to go and use something to cope. Sometimes you will win, sometimes you will lose. And that is an important lesson that you learn even when in your schoolwork. Sometimes you will do well, sometimes you may not do well. And just like in the game, if you didn't make the shot or you got out, you reflect and see what you could have done different. So too in school, if you didn't get the grade, you search yourself and realize, well, hey, eventually you reach to a point where you start taking responsibility. You realize, look, I should have stayed away from the social media and given a little more time to my schoolwork. And I know I would have done well. You understand? So that what happens in one area of activity, knowledge is always transferable. Even though I do this lecture, I do a lot of other things. Physical work, and as a result, you can transfer knowledge from one area to the other. So that, you know, another question that I know I could discuss that role model some more, but I have another question here. You know, that my loved one relapsed. Does that mean recovery isn't possible? And this is a very important question because, you know, a lot of people get discouraged. You know, they're bringing their parent or relative for counseling, for treatment, and they're doing well. But you see, what happens when in a family like that, the person who is addicted to the substance, eventually the people around them are unable to trust them because of the amount of times they promised that they will stop and they went back and drink. So now, even though they go for treatment or they come to me for counseling and they relapse, their family resign themselves and say, look, you know, I don't think he could ever stop. I don't, they start blaming him or her, you know, just hardened and wouldn't listen and gone back to the same behavior because they're immoral and they're just not making the right choices, not realizing that relapse is very often part of recovery because a person has depended on this drug for so long to help them feel better about themselves. When they're angry, they use it to help them to cope. When they felt depressed, they used it to relax, to deal with their withdrawals, to sleep, to eat, to the whole works. So that even though they stop drinking, they're going for counseling and acupuncture, for instance, they still have not learned in a few days, they would not have learned how to cope, how to feel better about themselves, and all of those things. And they're still susceptible to relapse. So when that happens, what I suggest to people is you come right away so that we can do a post-mortem of the relapse and see why it happened. And you can learn from that because the relapse does not happen when you took the drink. The relapse would have happened long before when you start making excuses for not going to the meetings. You already started to relapse. When you started to go online with the same old friends. When you're not doing, you know, praying to the God of your understanding and staying away from people, places, and situations where it is available. All of those you already relapse. It's just a question of time when you will take the drink. So in the postmortem of our relapse, the person learns that look, they begin to realize, hey, you know, I could have prevented this. And as a result, they learn going forward when they get the urge what to do, call someone, you know, eat something sweet. There's many strategies, but they learn the importance of going to the meetings and then eventually getting on the program of recovery themselves. So it's not a failure, it's a sign that the plan needs adjusting when they relapse. So that what matters is returning to treatment and continuing the journey because the knowledge, the counseling, what you were taught and learned in the counseling session was not erased when you took that drink. In fact, a lot of times it becomes into sharp focus now because, you know, this person didn't quite believe what the therapist said, you know, and told them that, look, you shouldn't go online with your friends right now, you know, because you're still kind of shaky, you know, avoid that river line. But you wanted to prove to your friends that, look, they can't get you to drink, and next thing you know, you got drunk. And then you lose confidence in yourself. And but then you would have learned that that was an opportunity for a very valuable lesson that look, you know what? I cannot take it for granted. I cannot do this alone. I have to get help. I have to follow the prescription that was given to me in as regards staying sober. So that I want to let anyone, for whatever reason you might have relapsed, you know, that is in the past. You can't go back and change it. You know, today is the only day in our life. Yesterday is gone. Tomorrow is just a vision. but today well lived can become a ray of hope for tomorrow. You understand? So we could learn from the past and we can decide, today I'm not going to take the drink. And thank God, the beautiful thing is that no matter how rich we are, how influential we are, how powerful we are, all of us, me and the vagrant, we have the same one day. We only have today. And actually, we only have this moment right now. We are not sure if I'm going to be around by this afternoon. So we only have one day, one moment at a time. And all we have to do is avoid that first drink, one day at a time. Learn from yesterday's mistake, as I said earlier on, so that you don't repeat it again. And so, what are the most effective treatments for addiction was another question. And of course, now we have introduced the use of acupuncture in the treatment of drug addiction and behavioral addiction generally that derives from depression and anxiety and all of those, so that you have counseling and therapy, that is individual and group therapy, has been found to be very, very effective. In fact, in Alcoholics Anonymous, what is used is group therapy, where not only one person, like in a counseling session, the therapist probably is a person who never used drugs themselves. So there are things that they may not understand from a been there, done that point of view. In my case, it's otherwise. I've been there and done that myself. So I know, I could feel, I could understand when a person sitting opposite me is what they are going through when they're telling me that, look, they can't stop or they have had challenges. I know what that is. So but a group talking to you is much more powerful than an individual. So that there's place for individual therapy because a lot of people are unable to speak about personal private matters in a group setting. This is why you need an individual setting where you can speak one-on-one with someone in confidence. And in the group, of course, you will get support. Now, I had referred to medication assisted treatment. And yes, that is still relevant and is useful even today. There are some people who have reached such a chronic stage who may have other comorbidities, it is called. Although their mental illness might have led them to start using first psychotropic drugs, and then they start using illicit substances, or they might have started using alcohol or illicit drugs and ended up becoming mentally ill and now has to be on psychotropic drugs as well. So I am not saying to anyone out there that you should just go and throw your pills. No. If you want to be completely sober, you have to do it in conjunction with your therapist, your psychiatrist, and all of that. And so that you can wean yourself and gradually come off being dependent on any, whether licit or illicit drugs. Support groups like Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous. There's also one called SMART that is a little bit different from Alcoholics Anonymous. And the I was trying to get what is the meaning of SMART. Anyway, so you have counseling, you have the SMART therapy group, and you have other faith-based groups. That is, some people, now the truth is, some people can do it on their own without any help, but those are very few, far and few between. You understand? The most people, though, who I would say between 60 to 80% of the people who go to Alcoholics Anonymous, for instance, the research shows they are able to eventually stay off alcohol. And Narcotics Anonymous is also using the same program, the 12-step program that is used in Alcoholics Anonymous. And now, let me say this, for the people who are able to do it on their own, hats off to you. But the mind is like this. If I often use this analogy. If you're walking down, briskly and you stump your toe, after that you're feeling the pain, you'll walk carefully for a little while. But if you let a day or two pass, you'll go walking the same way again because the mind does not hold on to pain. So too, a lot of people decide to stop drinking because of some crisis, some accident, some incident. They stop breathalyzed or something like that. And because of the fear and the pain arising out of that incident, they decide to stop. But with time, if you are just stopping because of fear or pain, after a little while, that fear and pain will dissipate. It is estimated within 6 weeks, any problem, any crisis redefines itself. So you don't remember it. And this is critical. This is why, after so many years, people still go to Alcoholics Anonymous. Because staying away from meeting can cause you to forget how it used to be and forget what you need to do. And eventually, in my practice here, 99.9% of the time, people who stopped were going to AA and relapsed. First question, were you still going to meetings? And they will tell you no. They had stopped going to meetings and they were trying to do it in their own. And yes, can someone recover without going to rehab? Yes, some people do. But recovery is easier and safer with structured support. In a life of drug addiction, I used to be the director of the Piparo Empowerment Center, and we were taking people off the streets from Riverside Car Park, this CSDP it's called. And these were people who are living on the pavements and, living very unstructured life. Even those who are still at home, people who have become addicted, tend to live they sleep when they want, get up when they want, they can't go to work anymore, they lose their jobs, they just living to drink and drinking to live, as we say sometimes. And their whole life become very unstructured. Sunday could fall on Monday, as we say. Rehab reintroduces a person to structure where you have to get up at a certain time, you have to take certain responsibilities for yourself, make up your bed, put your shoes in a particular way, keep them clean and fold your clothes. And after you use the showers, you need to clean up after yourself. You need to attend meetings and you need to behave in a certain way. So you are reintroduced to a structure so that these will be the things that you would need to rely on when you re-enter the world of work again. You want to this is what rehabilitation is about, reintroducing yourself to structure. And so rehab is not just about detox, it's about teaching tools for long-term change. Because a person who has been using alcohol and drugs, as I mentioned earlier on, would probably be suffering with low self-esteem, poor coping skills. And now that they've stopped using drugs, they have to learn new coping strategies so that they won't have to go back to their old behavior. Now, how can we reduce the stigma around addiction? Of course, this program, one of its main intention is to help people, our brothers and sisters, to understand that the person is not bad. They're not necessarily making bad choice because they are immoral. No, they have become addicted and it is a disease. So that it's a health condition, not a moral failure. And we need to use compassion that is born out of understanding, compassionate language. For instance, we may want to say, person, this is a person with an addiction, instead of calling them an addict. And encourage open conversations in families, workplaces, and communities. Now, how can families help without enabling? That's another big problem. Set clear boundaries and support recovery. For instance, you may want to say to your brother or your son, look, I will cook, wash, sweep, clean, and do everything for you once you're going to the meetings, once you're going, keeping your appointments for your counseling sessions and you're staying sober. But if you are not doing those things, I can't help you. I'm not going to pay the pusher. I'm not going to give you money to go and buy the drugs. You understand? But having set those boundaries, you have to stick with them. You cannot renege on it. They need to join support groups. You yourself need to join Al Anon or Naranon. These are for the family members of alcoholics or drug addicts, so that you understand how their drinking and drug use has affected you yourself. And remember, you can't force recovery, but you can create a supportive environment. You understand? Threatening and all of that. Well, if you can't carry out the threat, don't worry to even threat. Of course, on the previous program last week, I spoke about behavioral, digital, or gambling addictions. You can go to that program and look at it. And yes, these are just the same as substance addiction because they hijack your brain. The brain reward pathways the same way. They may not damage the body the same way, but they can devastate finances, relationships, and they can ruin your mental health. Counseling and support group work for these addictions can also be effective. And long-term recovery is really possible. I mean, I can say for this myself, I am more than 41 years, 8 months, and a few days from my last drink or cigarette. However, millions of people around the world are now living healthy, joyful lives in recovery. It takes support, patience, and daily effort, but it is worth it. So that if you or someone you have is struggling with addiction, remember help is available and recovery is possible. Reach out to local hotlines, support groups, or treatment centers in your area. And remember, each step, no matter how small, is progress on the road to recovery. The knowledge is never lost. So I want to thank you all again for joining me this morning for this program. And just before I go, let me just remind you, this program is going to be being recorded, and will be posted soon after its completion. And it will also be on YouTube and Facebook. All you have to do is put in my name, Ramnaresh Dwarika, spell it correctly, Addiction and Recovery, on Facebook or on YouTube, and all the programs will come up. And there are programs on various aspects of drug addiction. Understanding drug addiction, the program I did today, last week on digital addiction. The week before, I did a program on addiction among the aged, old people, and addiction, which is really very misunderstood. And previous to that, there was a program on women, the challenges that women have to face when they have an addiction. So all of these programs are there. You can refer to them. This program is going to be repeated again tonight on radio and TV Jagriti. So until next week, I want to wish all of you a safe and happy weekend. And please pass the information to anyone who you believe could benefit from the program. And if you have questions, you can text them to me at 768-5925, and I'll respond to them on the next program. You can also reach me at 671-3040 for an appointment if you need to. So I want to thank Radio and TV Jagriti for providing this airtime free of charge as a community service to all our brothers and sisters worldwide. And again, I want to thank the people in the station for facilitating this program every week. So thank you again, and see you again next week, Thursday.